Blessings and greetings to you from San Antonio, Texas. This is Pastor Brockhouse, your sheepdog at Mount Olive Lutheran Church, with another Mount Olive Minute devotion for you this week. This one comes from Romans chapter 12, verse 3. In the English Standard Version, we read, "For by the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think with sober judgment, each according to the measure of faith that God has assigned." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Do you ever experience life problems? That's a silly question, Pastor. Of course I do. We all experience life problems from one time or another. Some of us would say we have more problems than we care to think about, and if you would like to take some from us, Pastor, feel free to do so. But there's a really other big problem when we start thinking about ourselves. It's got one letter in it, the word itself. It's called I. It is the I, ego. That big ego in our lives that crops up from time to time, tries to prevent us from looking beyond ourselves for answers to the questions that plague us and confront us and the problems that overwhelm us from time to time. We tend to think we're strong enough to face things head on without help, without burdening other people, especially a very busy guy who must be working overtime 24/7, 365, dealing with the problems of the whole world, especially during our present pandemic. In fact, to a fault, some folks will just sit around and wallow in their problems, complaining but not reaching out to help, stubbornly refusing people who are well-intentioned and loving and would like to intervene or at least offer them some prayer and advice. It is in that last not so easy to solve problem area where we find ourselves turning out or turning away from others. And that's also where we find ourselves turning away from God. It is an interesting and distressing phenomenon in the course of church worship that those who are struggling the most with whatever problems in life they are encountering are those least likely to attend worship services. Before God, humbly praying, listening to His word, receiving His abundant grace is the first and foremost place to be when problems are overwhelming you. Receiving absolution from your confessed sins, taking Christ's body and blood given and shed for you for the forgiveness of sins and life and salvation. These are not things to avoid in an attempt to be the I solver for yourself. Here in God's house, God is all in for you. He reminds you again and again. He gives you the blessings overflowing in worship. He says to you, "My grace is sufficient for you." And His grace is sufficient for all problems, for your spiritual well-being, for your repentant heart, and for your forever dwelling place where there is a problem-free life for eternity. Now, those are tough things to talk about, and I know we are all experiencing problems, so I thought you might want to have a little bit of humor involved in this ego problem that all of us seem to have at one time or another. So I discovered this poem about three people. One called me, one called myself, and one called I. There once was a fellow named I, whose opinion of himself was quite high. His chest was puffed up and expanded. He could pat his back left or right-handed. And his head was so fat he couldn't wear any hat. It just poked through the clouds in the sky. Now I had a brother named me, who looked up to his brother, you see. He thought he was smarter than most, never missed an opportunity to boast. He talked often and loud, and next to I, he stood proud. And with the sister, the big egos were three. Sis was the youngest, a little thing named myself, but she was the leader of I and of me. Barely the size of a sweet Christmas elf, myself had enough ego for three. The world couldn't turn, fire couldn't burn, and day couldn't change into night unless myself made it happen with me and I's help, because only these three could be right. But after a while, the world started to tire of these three big inflated self-egos. They longed for respect and sincerity too, not in the me, myself, I, three amigos. Be humble, they said. Don't think highly of self. Give credit where credit is due. What matters is not whether you're first or you're last, but that goodness and grace lives in you. That wouldn't be easy for three talking heads who thought the world had revolved around them. But myself found new joy in sharing and caring. And me and I turned to you, her, and him. In a world so consumed with trying to be number one that people consider the sale of their soul, it's a comfort to know there's a power above whose Son showed the only true goal. So next time you think of me, myself, I, and forget how blessed you have been, get down on your knees and give thanks above to the one who forgives every sin. Share in the joy of the journey, my friend. Help others in need every day. For everyone's race ends up the very same end, but may not end up the very same way. Until next time, the peace of the Lord be with you.